All right, so let's see if we have everybody on board. So our topic for the panel discussion now is leadership imperative, putting people first. So today's session, we're going to have two panel discussions. One is going to talk about the people aspects, and the other one is going to talk about the elephant in the room. So this is the first one, and I'm being joined by a set of esteemed panelists. So I'll start with a brief introduction and then ask them to introduce themselves. So at the bottom left is Ashley Boots, who is HR transformation at RSA. Ashley, I guess people can see you, hear you, maybe sort of wave.
Hello. Hi.
Okay, yeah, there you go. Yeah, just making sure that your screen is not frozen. Then we have, so Ashley is based in UAE, in Dubai. Not to, I guess the temperature is probably going down a bit now compared to the 62 degrees that Craig talked about in the middle of Sahara. Then we have Devakaran Sekeran, who's joining us from Kuala Lumpur. He's the CEO of AP Emco Executives. After that, we have Karunesh Prasad, who's the founder of Change It All, as well as founder of Bridge It All. He's joining us from Singapore. And then we have Dean Smith, who is the COO of Adamo Telecom Iberia. He's based in Madrid, if I'm not wrong, somewhere in Spain, right?
Barcelona, actually, but yeah, close enough.
Barcelona, okay, yeah. My apologies, yeah. So Barcelona, and then we have Ayodeji Ajibola. In short, we call her Deji. She's joining us all the way from Lagos, Nigeria. So, so with that, Ashley, let's quickly, hear from you. What's the best way to describe yourself?
Oof, best way to describe myself. I think a person who loves transformation, always striving for better ways to do things, and a constant learner. So I think catching Craig's session just now was truly inspiring, and at the same time a little bit challenging because I recognize I'm going to need to make some changes. But a great session.
Okay, I'm just switching off the screen share, because then we could see all the people in the panel discussion. Next, let's go to you, Deva.
Hi, thank you, Anirvan. I'm right now in the talent management space, and I've always been under the people management area. So when you talk about the well-being of employees, definitely was something that was, it is close to my heart. But like what Ashley mentioned, listening to Craig just now, wow, it is something else. Going through that well-being issue and then taking on that marathon. I've never heard of that marathon before, and it's good learning, but I'm just wondering how can someone do that? That's amazing. That's amazing. Over to you, Anirvan.
Yeah, thank you, Deva. Karunesh.
Hi, everyone. Karunesh Prasad. People call me KP for just sake of simplicity. And I'm based out of Singapore. I run a company called Change It All. Change It All is a change management consulting company. And we combine the power of people, process, and culture to manage change. That's our job, and that's my profession. Industry, I've worked with GE and one more company, Indian company called RPG. That's only two companies that I worked for in my entire career. In the last 6 years, I've been in Singapore working on change management. So that's me.
Excellent. Dean.
Okay, I'll start by pointing out the grey hair, because I think that indicates my maturity. So I've been around a bit, and I've been fortunate enough to have a career that takes me all over the world. And listening to Craig earlier really did resonate. A lot of the challenges on that, well, about 25 years of global travel, it's enough. And we chose 4 years ago to stay put. And so I took a role as COO for Adamo Telecom in Spain without speaking any Spanish. So that's quite an interesting move. I've yet to do that. But I think, like Ashley, I get inspired by new things. I really like to try and make a difference. And I'm not one of those people that likes to sit back and just watch the world go by, which does have the counter effect that you do tend to probably work more than you should. But I really enjoy working with teams, motivating them and seeing what they can do, empowering them to bring on their own results. And I think one of the things I've seen, must be about 100 companies I've worked with as a consultant around over the years around the world, including Americas, Middle East, Asia Pac, Europe, is that there is a lot of lip service given to the people side of things. So it's really nice to see an event like this, which is putting together people who will be genuinely focused on making that the right thing for the businesses that they're involved with. And I have to say, I really do like working with businesses that take people seriously and put them first. So well done on this particular event.
Thank you. And Ayodeji.
Hi, everyone. Pleasure to be here and reconnect with some of my old GE colleagues. It's great. So big thank you, Anirvan, for putting this together. I think one of, the lockdown and the pandemic is, unlocking the possibilities, with going virtual. So I'm sure, before this, it'd have to be restricted to, an audience in Amsterdam or Europe at best. But now the opportunity just to have a session like this with people around the world, is phenomenal, to be honest with you. And just having that opportunity to share best practice and to realize that, some issues are common to all, just because we're all human with the same blood and water. For me, it's a really untapped possibility. And I must give kudos to you and to your team for realizing that potential and trying to unlock it through a forum like this. So I've been around quite a bit of a road less traveled, having come from, born, raised in Nigeria, West Africa. Took a brief break at some point in my legal journey, in university, to really ask myself if this was what I wanted to do for the rest of my life, and at some point decided no. So it was, starting to ask myself, okay, skills, abilities, things I like to do, what would it be? And at some point I decided HR was the path for me. And, weird because, at that time it wasn't the cool thing to do. At some point then it was law or IT or engineering. HR was something that was virtually not popular back then in my country. So that journey of, deciding I wasn't going to learn on the job, but actually get a bit of a foundation, going to school, what I thought was the best school, not having money, finding a scholarship to pay for that dream. And, it's been, haven't looked back since. I think it's really been a very interesting journey for me. And, what I do now in, companies that I've worked for, it's really pretty much the same in terms of helping companies keep the people agenda front and center in everything it is that they strive to do, chasing the business, chasing the numbers. How do we really put our people first? And it's quite an interesting topic we have today, because having supported businesses, that are multinationals in many countries, right? What is important for one country or one group or one, demographic can be very different for what's important or to what's important to another. So just helping companies, agree on things that are consistent across board, but also pay attention to those nuances as well, is a very interesting topic for me. So I'm looking forward to sharing. I'm looking forward to learning.
Excellent. Thank you for that introduction, Deji. And of course, I would also acknowledge Patton Henry, who's part of the audience. He uses this term people first. And this is, again, the time when Donald Trump was drumming about America first. He started using people first. I took the term from him. I don't know who the original creator was, but I thought this was very, very apt of putting people first in an organization. So leadership imperative, putting people first. So Karunesh, you've been an HR thought leader and you've worked in literally all parts of the world, including Europe, Asia, and in the US. What's your perspective on how people are putting it across the globe, some of the nuances that are there?
Thanks, Anirvan. Two things. Dean talked about the fact that a lot of companies do a lot of lip service on putting people first. And Deji said in her statement saying that, kind of no one size fits all. And this is what resonates with me the most, because there are a lot of best practices around the world, and many people are trying different things, but unless it is tailored and customized to the culture, the organization, the kind of ecosystem we have in that organization, it doesn't work. So that's number one. Number two is that that when organizations are working on any of the initiatives, or when they're working on that culture, it's a long haul journey. It's not a one initiative thing that you do something and then suddenly switch on and switch off. That doesn't happen. So it's a long haul journey, and people need to kind of realize that it will have to happen one step at a time. And a lot of things do happen in that process. Some of the big events like COVID, for example, or 9/11 have made the organizations change faster. And now we are realizing, everybody's talking about the fact that we need to make sure that people are safe, their well-being is in question, and therefore making sure that we are giving the support. But that support is not one initiative or one event. It's a combination of multiple different things, which includes, like I always talk about, people, process, and culture together. How we manage our people, what kind of support we provide to them, the listening forums and also the telling forums, they need to come together on one hand. The ecosystem, which includes the process of performance management, rewards, well-being, compliance, the entire support system, that needs to be there. And then the culture of how do we deal with people? Do we support them by making sure that the people have the empowerment to make decisions? Are they being monitored, or they are being left alone to just do things on their own? What's my performance management process to support them to be independent, delegated enough to be able to perform on their job unmonitored kind of thing? So that's the kind of change that we need to talk about if we want to really put people first. So in my opinion, it's a journey where every organization needs to do things depending on their own needs, number one. Number two is, if there's a large global corporation, they can't say that because we are doing this in US or doing this in Europe, the entire world needs to follow the same thing. That's something which will absolutely fail. And I hope that people get more and more aware and conscious about it. Instead of imposing their solutions at the entire global landscape, they need to get more conscious about allowing the local team to work on the principles with the local solution, tailor-made and customized for them. So that's my first reaction to this topic, because I think a lot of people are trying multiple different things. But at this stage, in principle, if the organization is conscious, they are aware, and they are listening to people, as well as creating the infrastructure and the ecosystem to support people. If that thumb rule is taken care of, I think we'll be able to make a lot of progress. But it's a long haul journey. So that's me. That's my take on this, Anirvan.
Thank you, Karunesh. Ashley, you come from the West, and your working career is now been a long journey, pretty long journey in the Middle East. From society perspective, very different approach to people, as in the sort of emerging markets, it's a lot more society based. In the West, it's a lot more individualistic based. In emerging markets, it's a lot more hierarchical. In the West, it's more sort of flatter, if I may say. What have you seen? What's your perspective on leadership imperatives on people first?
I think it's an interesting point, right? There definitely are a lot of variances across the regions, right? So yes, I have worked in developed markets, US and Europe. I spent a number of years Middle East and Africa, and I've also worked in Asia. So, with the full spectrum of experience, definitely variances have been noted. I think I really agree with the earlier point in that you have to be authentic, and it has to tie into what what is realistic and what is based in the culture for your particular area. Because if you don't, it will fall flat. So, you know, a one size does not fit all. So what I've seen here, let's just focus on the Middle East, where I've been for the last 12 years. It's a little bit different than what I've seen in some of the developed markets, right? You know, even as a concept where it's much more established to talk about well-being programs, you know, to even actually care about the well-being of employees. It's much more established discussion and topic in the West, we'll say, than it is in emerging markets. I think in the last 5 years or so, things are starting to change. What I've really seen is a shift from people are resources, not individuals, they're resources, they're a number. And if you don't work out, we'll find somebody else who does. It's about paying the bare minimum. It's not about providing the right environment. It's purely there to deliver work. And I think that's evidenced by how the region has grown, because historically people were here to build. Come, build a building and go. And now what you see the government's really shifting on in the last, we'll say 10 to 15 years, and really starting to see a big change in the last 5 years or so, is the shift to people as people. And actually, as we move towards service and knowledge work, you know, how can we best empower our people? How can we make it a positive environment? There's a lot more studies being done that are shared around companies that treat their people well, perform better, right? So it's not just, you know, if at the beginning it was purely a dollars and cents type of discussion, and now it's linking the people side of it to the top line as well as the bottom line, and having that drive some of the discussion. So we're seeing more of an adoption now in the region. It's becoming a lot more prevalent. We're seeing, you know, corporate well-being apps that are tailored to the region. You know, there's different things also in terms of what people are used to sharing, right? So in, say, the Netherlands, for example, there's no such thing as a secret. Everybody's very open, forthcoming. You know, in the US, there may be fewer details that are shared. In, you know, in the Middle East, it's a lot about relationships. So sharing, and even, you know, going back to Craig's point earlier, know when to ask for help. There's still a lot of stigmas attached around that. So there's a big push around, you know, mental well-being and trying to remove that as a taboo. So there are definitely variances across the different regions. We're seeing across the board an important push towards it, which makes me extremely happy. It's a topic that's really close to my heart. So progress is being made. We're catching up.
Thank you, Ashley. Dean, you know, let's get your perspective, and again, kind of dovetailing into what Ashley mentioned. You've held leadership positions both in Asia, and now you're back in Europe. What are some of the, you know, compare and contrast? And you know, Deva, for your benefit, Dean was based in Kuala Lumpur for many years.
Yeah, I really miss the food, KP. I'm going to come out and see you guys.
Excellent.
So, yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, I've seen a dramatic difference between different countries. Everything that's been said so far, I need to echo. Ashley's spot on as well. I think what's also worth mentioning is that you've got to have the right balance as a leadership in a business. It's not about people first doesn't mean doing what the people want all the time, but it's the way that you steer that ship and take the workforce, the stakeholders as well on the journey with you that makes the difference. But I've seen some disasters in that space. You know, I've worked with businesses where the slightest noise from the workforce, from their people, and they change direction and they give in. And then you don't have a led company. You have a company that meanders and doesn't really achieve. So you really do have to have that balance, and you do need to listen. Communication with everybody in the right way in the business is an absolute imperative. And I would say that's the number one thing I've seen done badly over the years, is communication in the right way with the workforce. But if you bring people on the journey, you set the right vision, you get everyone bought into that, then things work. It works through osmosis because people know what's going on. They feel part of it. They're willing to be led and willing to collaborate to achieve those goals. You get a lot of businesses that have very strong leadership, but they don't really take the business with them. they know what they want, but they don't really care. You've just got to do what they say. And I've seen it doesn't work very well. It's not sustainable. And you've heard a lot over many years with some big businesses with that style of leadership, where they end up having, when they grow, they end up having workforce issues significantly, and they have to change that philosophy. So, and I also see it in small businesses, startups, and entrepreneurs that have a particular strength, and they're great with working on their own with 2 or 3 people, but you get to 20, 30, 100 people, and their communication skills are just not up to the job to take the people with them. So for me, that communications thing is something I've seen done really badly, but also on occasion very, very well. And I have to admire those businesses and those leaders that do genuinely communicate at the right time, in the right way, with the right people to bring everybody along. And the difference I've seen, in particularly with Asia, I worked extensively in the Middle East and the Americas as well, but 12 years living in Malaysia. There is a phrase, and it applies in the Middle East as well, face saving, which you've got to be very sensitive to that in the way that you deal with all people issues, because you'll only strengthen the problem if you just point out the obvious and try and fix things without being sensitive to that particular cultural issue. In Europe, it's less of an issue. It's still there. We're human. We all have the need to be respected, the need to be wanted and loved, and believe that we're doing the right thing. But it's less of an issue in Europe than it is in Asia and the Middle East. And so when you work in those environments, you really do need to consider how to communicate in the right way to avoid causing a bigger problem from what could be a relatively small problem. And I have seen some fairly dramatic escalations of issues when small things become big things because of the way the communications have worked. So for me, people first is really about balanced leadership. It's setting the vision, bringing people along through good communications, but making sure as well that you reinforce that with everything that KP was saying earlier, where you make sure you've got the framework in place for people to be part of that journey and be recognized for their part of that journey as well. It's important.
Thank you, Dean. And just sort of staying on the thought of face saving, Deva, let me go to you. And again, I think a lot of the times face saving is directly related to not just you yourself or the position that you hold, but also the company that you're part of. If the larger the company, the bigger the face, so-called face saving you may need to, compared to being an SME or a mid-market. And you've done your transition from large marquee brand into being an entrepreneur. What do you see? What's your perspective? What kind of changes do you see?
I want to say in terms of face saving, it's not necessarily a thing anymore. I think everybody's realized that there has to be some form of respect. But if you're looking at, again, coming back to the people first agenda and how leaders and subordinates also can have a people first attitude, I think for me it brings out the 3 main factors. I believe everybody covered here, but for me it's the 3 main factors. First is looking at doing the right thing. Like what Dean mentioned, not always being the Mr. Nice guy all the time or Miss Nice, but doing the right thing by making sure that they understand why there is a need for certain action, which might not be very favorable. If people understand that, then it's not going to have a big issue. Even like they are going to be not insulted. So the face saving part is understood, and that brings us to a very important second point is communication. Again, something Dean you touched about it, but communication is a vital aspect, and I think a lot of people miss that. But how important it is, it's needs to be done. For example, a lot of, even in Malaysia right now, we talk about female leadership and having 30% of the board as a 30% for female leaders. But this doesn't mean that they are going to neglect the guys. But how do you communicate that and how do you present that so people understand why we are doing it, the reason for diversity and inclusion, and why it will benefit the company, that will then make people understand, and then again will not be insulted. There is no need for a face saving agenda because you've properly communicated it. And finally, Karunesh spoke a little bit about process and culture. For me, that encompasses about structure. how do you present it to the group? Now, coming from a big MNC or working in several MNCs and moving on to becoming my own entrepreneur and working with a lot of SME, there is a change, there is a difference. But one thing that helps both is the structure. When you have a clear, defined structure, what is the process, what is the culture, whether you're a big company like Apple or a small printing company, it helps people to understand. So again, it's doing the right thing, it's communicating and having a proper structure. It avoids people being insulted. It really guides people on how to take them through a journey, regardless of the MNC or multinational companies or a small SME companies. That's my view.
Thank you, Deva. Deji, now your turn. And I would like to get your perspective from a couple of angles. One is you yourself made the transition from legal to HR, which is more clinical or more to the point, to more feeling, more empathetic on one side. And on the other side, you worked with large companies in emerging markets, in a remote location. So leadership imperative and putting people first. Let's hear your perspective on it.
Interesting angle, Anirvan. So if I think about, my legal life, so before I made the transition, I decided to actually work as a lawyer. To be sure, I didn't like it because I knew once I made that transition, I wouldn't look back, basically. So I did work in a law firm for a year to give me a closer experience to the legal profession. And then I was really convinced, I was making the right decision to move. But I found that law is a good background, I would say, for human resources management, because it gives you, of course, protecting employees, their rights, their angles, what have you, respect for policies, compliance, and whatnot. So, it's been a very good foundation for me, as it were, in my HR life, especially when I think about, the challenge of the multinationals in emerging markets, right, where there are lots of policies they're not aware of, so even when they have a law firm or a retainer to give them the letter of the law, my role has consistently always, I always find myself helping them see the spirit of the law, right? So that they apply that law, make that decision with a human face, with an empathetic face to the employee. So it's really been very useful for me in terms of, the kind of work it is that I do. But I've seen that one thing that, multinationals have to continue to be mindful of when they talk about putting people first. And, the other panelists have addressed it as well in different ways, is really about not one size fits all, right? So even if within the same company you have a policy, you have a practice, it's very important to think locally, right? When I say think locally, it's okay, this is your global, whatever it is, but how do we land this in this area with its group in a way that they would appreciate and it would resonate, with them? And there's so many examples you could use. And then also talked about communication, engagement, carrying them on the journey, so that even if employees are not satisfied with the outcome of a decision, at least they should be satisfied with the process through which that decision was arrived at, right? So it's not about happy outcomes, everyone's happy, pleasing employees. It's really about where they carried along in that process, in that thought process, so that they can at least explain it and justify it to themselves and to their peer groups. And then when I think about putting people first from a leadership imperative standpoint, is also recognizing the critical role of managers and leaders in the organizations, the ones with and without titles, right? Because you'd find that, in every organization, you have your influencers. That didn't just come up with social media, right? You have the influencers in the team that everybody listens to. So how do you, as a company, big or small, how do you recognize those people and invest and be more intentional about carrying them along, in that decision making? How do you create that kind of environment where, their views are heard, right? And that way, so that when decisions are made, then, you know, at least people are satisfied that you took all factors and all views into consideration before arriving at those decisions. So it's a continuous, I would say, song and dance, as it were, going back and forth, because of course, you know, and I see this all the time where every country, you know, in a big company, every country likes to feel they're unique, or it's a peculiar situation, you don't understand our peculiarities. And it's really the company's, should I say, role to help them see the consistencies and the common themes across countries, and how important it is that they have a consistent, should I say, framework for a lot of things, right? Just so that it's easier to manage. So I see the legal thing always comes into play. And, you know, with someone that wears both hats, it's really helping employees it's really helping the company to, should I say, build that bridge and keep that connection, right? So for example, if I use a very basic example around when the tough decisions like redundancies have to be made. And it's typical, you know, multinational practice, okay, what does the law of the country say? It's 2 weeks notice or a month's notice, we're gonna do a month's notice. And I think that's when my role comes in to say, hey, in this market, it's not gonna take you a month to find a job, you know, for example. So how do we make that longer? How do we provide, you know, career transition services, for example, right? Just to help employees ease out of the organizations, because they become the ambassadors for the organization later on as well. You know, so you know, there's so many examples you could use in terms of localizing things we do globally. And really that for me is how you put people first. Do you have those avenues to have a listening ear? You know, because I find people like to feel like, yeah, I had a say in this, my voice was heard. You know, the management listened to us. You know, we're not happy with the decision, but okay, they listened to what we had to say. I think if a company can succeed at that, then it makes decision making and consistency implementation a lot easier.
Thanks, Deji. So now, you know, shifting gears here. So a couple of things. One is for the audience, if you have any questions for the panelists, please type them into the Q&A, or if you have any comments, put them in the chat box. So some of you had attended the first session of Gyan Nagpal, and he talked about democratization of jobs, as well as he had used a quote back from the 1930s, where they talked about some changes, people first kind of an approach, although the term was not used. And then on the other side, we see the rapid adoption that's taking place with respect to digital technology, where a lot of technology is now making inroads to our day-to-day lives. Given all of this, I want to hear from you guys, you know, much of the people first approach is a very 20th century thinking, whereas we probably now need a 21st century thinking, especially when we, as we get into the third decade, wherein a people first approach probably needs a radical change. What's some of your reflections?
Can I just begin there, if you don't mind? A few years ago, we started on an automation program, quite significant in a large international business, which of course, with robotic process automation, has the capability to replace significant numbers in the workforce. And I had a team of about 500 people globally in shared services, different locations. And clearly the target was to try and improve our operations, reduce costs, but improve quality and so on. So this was all being done retrospectively, in the sense we built the operations with people at the core of that. So making everything that needed to be done manually, it was done by a human. Had we actually switched that around in the beginning, well, the technology wasn't really mature enough in many years ago, but it is these days, and thought about those operations with technology first, actually then the impact on the people later is way reduced. So you can design, if you have the opportunity to design processes or new operational centers or whatever it might be, in today's world, you can design it by understanding that if you put people in and then later on take them out with automation, you're actually affecting the people way more than if you design that operation with technology in the mix at the same time. So you design a hybrid technology people environment to make to make the optimum outcome and the least impact on people. And, you know, actually in those environments, although it's, I know it has some negative connotations, the performance, once we'd established some processes being automated, the performance was amazing. I mean, we had 100% accuracy, no downtime, 3.5 to 4 times productivity, reduced user licenses because one robot would do 4 times the work. So a license for a robot, you don't need 4 people. There were loads of benefits. Clearly the challenge was how to retrospectively apply that. So for me, to put people first, sometimes we need to think about how to design with people, but technology first in that design as well. So that's just something to comment there, because we found it much easier to design new with technology built in and not have to disappoint people with redundancies and changes in roles and so on, than to do that the hard way around and then have to make people redundant. So
yeah, yeah, go on, Ashley.
Yeah, I'd like to build on what Dean said, but also with a slightly different view. You know, I speak a lot around digital transformation because, you know, with the work that I do with a finance background, system implementation, now with HR transformation, a lot is digitally enabled. And I would argue actually with people first as a starting point and as a mentality, and I absolutely hear and agree with what you said, I'd offer a slightly different view in that, you know, I would argue that still starting with people is still a viable alternative, because even if we know that we're starting with technology and we're using technology as a key enabler, right? At the end of the day, it is still around people, because it's going to impact how our colleagues do the work. It's going to impact what skills are going to be obsolete. And if we only think about the people after the technology, we may have missed a really critical opportunity where we can upskill, right? Or where we can help them grow and carry them along that journey, because let's be serious, there will always be an impact at the end of this, right? As we drive efficiencies, there will be an impact, and maybe net headcount could remain the same, but the type of work being done will be significantly different. You know, as you said, you had 4 people doing certain activity, now 1 robot. What do you do with those 4 people? And where the work that those 4 people were doing may no longer exist, could those 4 people be used for something else, right? So because that manual piece is now being done by a robot, is there the value added piece? Is there that knowledge part that can continue? And if not, yes, there will be an impact, but then can we bring in different talent that can then take the products of our robots and our automated systems and, you know, add value to our customers, our shareholders, et cetera. So I would argue that even then we can still start with a people first, because it will always end up being about people.
Yeah, machines don't bite back.
Not that I've seen yet.
No, not yet anyway.
Yeah, some of the machines may say people go first. Right.
You know,
so
I have a slightly
yes, Karunesh. Yeah, go on.
one more just a thought here. You know, we always say that when you're digitizing, simplify before you digitize, right? That's the term we all use, because that's where rubber hits the road. If we are able to manage a process well without digitizing, that means it will work after digitization also. So think about this. If an organization has not had the culture of providing good feedback to people and coach people, even if we bring in multiple apps and tools and digital tools to do that, it will not work because the culture is not there. And that's where I get worried about people thinking about digitization as a solution to some of those basic cultural elements. Because an organization, if they don't have the culture of putting people first, all the tools and apps and digital intervention is only going to bring an enabler, a tool to be able to do the same thing. If they were not doing that without it, they'll still not do it. So we need to combine some of these things together to make sure that in essence, as a leadership team, they're walking the talk on putting people first. If they're doing that well, then all the digital interventions will start working as well. So that's just my thought that I wanted to share.
I mean, I've got something just to add on that one. I totally agree. But sometimes this is a very practical scenario which really happened in a real life case. So I used to work for a international courier company, and they needed to change the whole process of how the couriers were getting the message, which was very manual, to something that was very digital. At that time, it was digital. So I don't think anybody thought about, okay, shall we put this in first, or should we give a training? What we did was we upskilled the people who was going to do the new work. So the process was upskilling people who never did that before, give them a training that is absolutely required, and then take on the new role. What it did was nobody lost their job. The other guys were, can't take a bigger task or whatever. The new guys were upskilled, and there was no loss of job. So I think the most important thing is, can we upskill people in this new era of technology? And because we are generally a knowledge worker kind of group all over the world right now, very little blue collar, mostly there's a lot of knowledge workers. Everybody knows how to handle a smartphone. To upgrade this new group of individuals, it's not a big task. So I think if companies focus on upskilling and always focusing on training, that will actually solve a lot of problems of retrenchment or redundancy. And how do we maintain the knowledge workers? I mean, that's my view on how technology and people can combine together.
Yeah, I agree. Just to comment on that, I know depending on the CEO of the company and the CFO's key objectives, sometimes simplification isn't permitted. You just need to make some cuts very quickly, and replacing people with robots it can be done shorter than having to re-engineer processes, particularly in global empires. So fully agree with the commentary, and best practice is absolutely to simplify and to upskill and to put people into new roles. But sometimes the stakeholders of the business, that often shareholders or private individuals, they have needs that need to be met, and sometimes people do get put to second place in that respect. It's unfortunate, but I also see that some businesses need to make some very quick decisions on these things and get things done. Otherwise, the whole business may go under. So in those circumstances, there does have to be some tolerance for getting things done quickly. And I've just seen one of the questions here about how democratic should management be. In those situations, you can be very democratic, and then by the time you've got everybody involved and questions answered and inputs received, the business has stopped. So I think there is this very tricky balance for good leadership to take decisive action where the business needs to survive, because without that business, nobody has a job. And I think sometimes it can be very tricky for the workforce to really understand that and really buy into that concept, because it can be many levels of hierarchy above them where those decisions are made. And so they are quite detached from that strategic imperative. But the financials of the business and the stakeholders who drive that, who own it effectively, they're the ones that make these demands. And sometimes you have to make unfavorable decisions that do demote the people. But I agree with everybody. I mean, if you put people first in most thinking, and at least in those situations, even where you have to make cutbacks or replacements by machines, the way you do it is all important. And you can do it badly, and everyone gets really upset, and you lose reputation, and you create a huge workforce issue. Or you can engage, and you can do that process systematically and empathetically, and get things done in a much better way. And put people into new roles where you can.
Yeah,
Dean, I think I'll just go to extend. Sorry, Deji, I'm just going to come back to you quickly. A couple of things just to start up the discussion. First, a quote by Henry Ford, which essentially I don't remember the exact quote, but it essentially said, if you leave it to the people, they want faster horse carriages and cars would not be born, right? So people first does not necessarily work all the time. I think there is that element. The second thing is, and again, I try to look for examples, but I struggle to find good examples. Whenever a company is under cost pressure, the first things that go are people benefits. Whether it's training, travel, team events, anything to bolster team spirit are the ones that go out of the window. Not just that, it is expected that people who are in that mix would give unwavering loyalty to the needs of the company. They may be asked to take pay cuts, etc. But once the things turn around, management often forget about that. So forget about them. So so I thought maybe I'll just put it in the mix and get some comments going. Deji, you wanted to say something.
It's I think it's fortuitous that you asked me to hold on before speaking, because what you just talked about, Anirvan, is a very familiar journey to me. And I think what has helped, and what I mean by that is, cutting back on people benefits. But I think creating an environment of trust and credibility.
Yeah, Deji, we lost you for
like that.
Deji, we lost you for a few seconds. So if you just can share it again. Deji? Yeah, I think maybe we do it without the video. Yeah, can you try again, Deji?
Okay, sure. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, yes, we can hear you. Yeah.
Okay, my apologies. No, I was just saying that, it's the scenario you just described is very familiar to me in terms of, management, employees' concerns around management, permanently taking away things that were supposed to be taken away temporarily. And I think what has helped in my career, because I've been in that situation a few times, is really building that credibility, right? In other words, if that has happened once in the organization, then most likely people are going to feel that it will happen again. So if I use a very basic example around, having to come back on a particular benefit in a previous time and giving a window for reinstating it. And then we went ahead and we did, we kept our word, and the benefit was reinstated even earlier than we planned to. So when COVID hit, and we had to go back to the table to have that conversation again, it was easier to land because that credibility had been built. I mean, people tend to forget, you know what I mean, in terms of, when you do things right, and they remind you when you do things wrong from a company standpoint. So also putting that in the forefront to say, oh, remember our track record, quote unquote, of how we had handled this kind of situation before. What you're fearing isn't what happened, and we're assuring you this is what is going to happen this time around. And it was easier to land, especially when you're dealing with a very, should I say, skeptical workforce or a unionized workforce, who have been burnt in the past. So I think building that credibility, the company as much as possible, keeping to their word, and things happen, mitigating factors come up, and plans don't go, things don't always go according to plan. But I think to the extent to which they're able to maintain that credibility with employees, it goes a long way. And to the point we raised earlier around, automation and jobs and whatnot, I think from my view, I think what has happened with digitization, automation is, yes, there's a reduced number of, number of people that you most likely need. And to Dean's point, decisions will be made at the top. But I think it's the extent to which the organization helps people to build the new or develop the new skills they need, right, to thrive in the modern work age. That goes a long way as well, right? So in the meantime, before you get to that, cost-cutting, should I say, decision, we know automation comes in phases. Typically, it's hardly ever in one fell swoop. But what do we as an organization, what do we do to help people develop those skills? And when it gets to the point where we have to let some people go, how easy do we make it for them to transit out of the workforce? So no quick wins, no easy solutions in any of these things that have to be done, but it's really how you treat people through that unpleasant process that goes a long way.
Thank you, Deji. Mid-management.
Can I just add very quickly, Anirvan, on that one?
Sure.
One of the things I want to say is upskilling, and I did mention just now, it is not purely just the company or the organization's responsibility. Every individual who is, moving up or wants to do something have to find a way to upskill themselves. So there is an element of the company providing the upskilling or the training. At the same time, it is also the responsibility of every individual to upskill themselves to stay relevant. So that, we will find our situation, like what Dean mentioned, there will become a time where CFOs and CEOs have to make the tough decision. And we talked a little bit about that earlier on, to making the right decision. But if you are upskilled and if you are let go by one organization, you might find yourself in another or even better organization because of your own initiative. Just wanted to add that point.
Good point.
Cool. All right. Yeah. So I think on that bit, and in fact, the person I was just thinking about just appeared on the screen, Clint, and he's going to talk about something later in the evening, later in the day. But their topic is essentially around using mid-management as an accelerator, as a catalyst. People in the mid-management, and all of us have been through those journeys, often find ourselves in a very precarious position. On one side, there is the demand of the executive leadership, which Dean, you alluded to, business priorities and profitability, revenue growth. On the other side, it's the frontline workers, the individual contributors who need to be managed. And often the mid-management do not know what to talk about when it comes to people first. So let's hear some examples, some thoughts from that.
Yeah, I'd like to get started on that one, if I may. It brings back to the initial point around culture. And I think the culture that's set by leaders of an organization play a big role in how that scenario plays out. And I think it's important to also note that when I personally talk about people first, I don't mean we bend over backwards and make bad business decisions because we're putting our people first. I mean that we're thinking of them in all the decisions that we take, right? So if we do need to shut down an entity, if we do need to restructure, if we do need to have massive job losses to keep the company afloat, I think it is the way in which we do things. And I think I agree, mid-management is often stuck in the middle because they're the ones that need to execute on the mandates that have come down but haven't necessarily been part of the discussions and when those decisions were taken. But if the culture of the company doesn't allow to even have the dialogue or look at people or make sure that when these tough business decisions are taken, if we're not treating people in the right and fair way, I think that's the problem, right? And that's where it becomes more challenging. That's where we lose credibility as an organization. And some of that reputational damage has long-lasting reach, right? And I think it's our duty of care to make sure that whatever business decision we need to take, because again, we're not a charity, and we do need to make sure that we're sustainable and profitable, but doing things in the right way. So we as leaders have that responsibility on ourselves to make sure that that's possible.
Yeah, here. And actually relating to one of the questions about ongoing training and development and things that were said here, one of the things I've noticed in a practical way, when bad news needs to be delivered or change, and everyone doesn't like change, so change or bad news needs to be delivered, it does cascade, and you need to have the management, the middle management playing their part in that communication mechanism. But what I've also realized is that, there are good and bad communicators at all levels. So unless you support them and train them and develop them to be good communicators, sometimes that message fails horribly when it's being transmitted across teams. And I've seen examples of this that have caused really big union issues in unionized companies because of the way these things were communicated, when it's been very clearly documented and the first line communications were absolutely crystal. But as it goes down, a bit of whisper comes in and it morphs, and people just don't want to present bad news. So they put it in a way that's ambiguous or just don't even mention it. And people make assumptions, and then the whole thing is turned around. So this ongoing nurturing and communication training and development is really important for change in a business. And I think that's a good point that I think Alfonso raised. It needs to be ongoing, and people need to be nurtured on that journey through good and bad times.
Excellent. And I was just looking at the clock. It's These kind of discussions can go on for hours, and especially when we have a very knowledgeable panel like this. But before we go, just one more round of quick, let's say, input from you guys. What should we hear of when it comes to, let's say, people first or employee well-being? A lot of it is still a conventional organization management, right? I mean, if I send somebody to training, it is part of the organization learning and development program. When it comes to some of the other aspects, team events, again, part of the typical management of an organization. How many or what would you like to see or say which says, yeah, this is a company that has taken affirmative steps to make sure that it is people first? Because organizations are made up of people, and there will be stuff that is going to be done anyways with respect to people. But let's hear, as a takeaway, where we can hear some examples from you where there are affirmative, positive, specific steps that have been taken, which says that they have eventually, or they have finally decided to put people first in their organization.
Okay, I think it's a combination of high and low. If I may go first. When I say high and low, it's one thing. For example, if you have a leadership team, right? And the question to ask, for example, is how many opportunities do employees have to engage with the senior leadership? So in some companies, it's just, once they have the quarterly town hall, for example, but could there be more sessions, right, where people can interact with the leadership team, ask them questions? I mean, we've implemented that in my organization, and it's really helped to get to know the senior leadership that people look up to as people. So you remember the points that, myself, some of us raised earlier around open channels of communication, engagements, listening. Right, it doesn't have to be anything that's clearly expensive or high level, but just having that listening ear, having those open channels of communication, providing as many opportunities as possible for the employees to interact with the leaders of the organization, formal and informal, paying particular focus on your emerging leaders. So, when we talked about, when we're talking about middle management, I call them emerging leaders, right? How much focus is given to emerging leaders? What are the quick wins, right? So, in this day of, our virtual reality, we have a lot more engagements on Zoom, for example, from, strategy sessions, outside the normal rhythm of business to just hangouts, right? So I'm in a, drinks business, for example. We have sessions where we, get an experienced, should I say, connoisseur of drinks, liquor and whatnot, to show us how to make cocktails with those drinks. So it's the high, that's why I mean, it's the high stuff, it's the low stuff as well. And I think a combination of both goes a long way, and it's really asking yourself, okay, what can we do to make people bring their whole selves to work, right? So their whole selves being not just the business person, the professional, but even the wife, the mother, the husband, the father, as well. And if you have initiatives around that, I've seen from my experience that it goes a long way.
Yeah, it's lucky to be working for an alcohol company. You can get sommeliers and creating cocktails.
Perks, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
If I may go, just very quickly, I mean, just to talk to encompass what Deji and Dean talked a little bit about middle management. And my experience, middle management will make not everybody, but a few of them will take the wrong message, even though how well structured you've communicated, and then they have been, experience of giving the wrong message to the intended target. So how do we fix that? Is service recovery, a quick service recovery by senior management to actually address that as soon as we find there is a flaw. So if you have a team of 1,000 members and you have 20% of them are middle management, there is going to be a scenario where they are going to miscommunicate the message. But how fast we can have a service recovery by the senior management to address the flaws and to say, hey, it's my fault, it's our fault, or this is what the message should have been. That's how it gets fixed. I've seen that also, and how fast it works. Actually, by right, actually improves the whole scenario after that. So I think as as individuals, realize that the very top cares about them, and it's not just blaming everything on the senior middle management. It helps a lot. So that's my input on how do we fix this kind of thing, especially supporting the middle management.
I think my view would be, in terms of making progress, it would be to be intentional. There's a lot of different things that's out there, but you have to be intentional and be authentic to your company, your needs, your culture, your people, and stay the course, right? So once you've made the decision that this is what you plan on doing, how do you align, the people, process, and culture to how do you align all of those elements to make sure that you as an organization are in fact moving in the right direction? Because if not, it's lip service. It's, nice, putting values up, words on a poster on the wall and never to be looked at again. But you need to embed that into all aspects of your organization. So I think that the two key points are be intentional and stay the course, because it doesn't happen overnight.
You're talking as the example, Anirvan, and I remember watching a movie a few months back called Hotel Mumbai. If you remember the Taj Hotel terrorist attack incident, and the way that was dealt with, putting people first comes and reflects not only on your people but also on your customers, because when the way you deal with your customers, the way you deal with the people, it's part of your entire ecosystem and the culture. And you might have read or seen an article which came in HBR about how Taj hotels have gone about putting a culture where the entire system of how they deal with the training part of that, how they put the guests in front, how they do the service, all those are years of work that has gone into that. And that incident actually brought forward how the hotel and the staff dealt with the entire incident. So I would say that if you think about examples, people talk about Apple as an example, Starbucks as an example, but this example stood out in front of me because this was a great example of how they dealt with the employees and how they dealt with their customers also. And I have a very close friend of mine who is a senior HR person at Taj Hotel. He was sharing the stories about how they worked on the families, supported the families through the transition, whoever, people who lost their lives, how they kind of supported them. And that's where, the panel is talking about, how we need to create the entire, leadership walking the talk. And this is a great example of how leadership actually was walking the talk to make things happen. And that's what we need to look for. It's not about one incident, one initiative. It's about the entire journey.
I think for me, the two words I would use at the end is for people first is to engage and to respond in the right way. And response has a number of different things, and it's not necessarily what everybody asks for, but it's a balanced response. But you need to engage to get to that balance, and too many businesses act without engagement in the right way at the right time. So for me, ongoing engagement, ongoing response, balanced.
Thank you. So I guess with that, we'll come to the end. And before we leave for the next session, just a couple of ideas or thoughts that I want to leave with people. First of all, as I'd mentioned a couple of times, there is a digital tsunami which is on its way. Huge changes are coming in. And that's going to disrupt the way we do business. COVID-19 has just accelerated the change that was supposed to be there. Secondly, a lot of all baby boomers would be hitting the retirement age in the coming decade, and the Gen Z work is going to enter the workforce, which means digitally native. They're going to bring in their own flavor into the way they work. But they're not just digitally native; they're also highly democratized in their thinking, and they have their own, let's say, thinking or ways of thinking, very strong in their opinions, etc. And that definitely is going to have impact on the workplace. Can we still continue to use the 20th century thinking in the 21st century in the third decade? We don't know. Has the time run out? We don't know yet. The jury is still out. So with that, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the panelists, Ashley, Dean, Devakaran, Karunesh, and Ayodeji. thank you for sharing your thoughts, your insights, and it's lovely to have you in a discussion this time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
you.
Cheers.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
See you in
Take care.
KL, Dubai.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.